Hey guys, my name is Jay Wilson. I'm a freelance consultant through my company Onyx Reporting, and I do DOMO. More specifically, I do DOMO implementations, but I also spend a lot of time in the DOMO dojo, kind of reading the questions people have questions about, and then trying to answer them. User 38617 caught my eye because they asked a question that I'd literally never seen on the dojo before. And as I was thinking through how I would go about solving the problem, I immediately recognized that it would be very difficult to implement without ETL. And so I had to do it. I had to try. I had to do it. And I made a tutorial video about it. And I'll tell you what. To understand the solution, you have to understand DOMO. So there's a lot of shifting parts that are coming together in this solution. And that's why this video is a good bit longer than most of my tutorials. So if you're strapped for time, skip to the last 10 minutes, I guess, and listen to the explanation. But if you want to really understand what's going on under the hood and why you're having the experiences you're currently having in DOMO, specifically related to window functions, stick around to the whole explanation. Now, I have done tutorial videos about window functions before, and I'll link them in the description below, but I'm really going to take the time to dig into the sequel of what's going on, because if you don't understand the sequel, then you don't understand why we have to do it the way we do it. Cool. So user 38617 wants to calculate the average time to accumulate the value. As soon as you read accumulate, you're thinking cumulative sum. And if you're thinking cumulative sum, you're like, how do I do that? And you're probably thinking I should Google cumulative sum and put Onyx reporting at the end, because that's me. And I do videos about stuff. And I don't specifically have cumulative sum in the title of anything, but I do have, I think, window functions. I have all sorts of window function stuff that I've covered. But anyway, what are we talking about here? So you remember back before coronavirus, and you could go to carnivals and they would have like skee ball and different games, and you collect points, and after you collect a certain number of points, you can get a big prize, right? And this is exactly what this user wants to do. It's like, how long does it take people to accumulate enough points to win a prize across all of the different games that I have? And the first time I looked at it, I didn't clock that they're looking for average across all of the games. But once I realized that, I said, oh man, that makes the solution even more difficult. So if you want to do average across all of the things, just yet another layer of difficulty. Now, this user also wants to do it all in beast mode so that they can adjust timeframes without writing a cumulative sum, the accumulation into a data flow. That makes a lot of sense. But if your data is not streaming, as in coming in multiple times a day, and you're only updating once a day, and we're talking like, let's say I don't know, 10 million rows. If we're dealing less than 10 million rows of data, you should do this in Magic ETL, especially Magic ETL 2.0. It will be worlds faster and easier to understand than this hour-long tutorial you're about to have. If it were me, I would recommend to my client, do this in Magic ETL, unless the data is coming in so fast that I can't afford the processing time, or if I have just so much data, it takes more than 20 minutes. Because Magic ETL can process, I have data flows running 50 million rows, outputting, well, less than 50 million, but very performant. And given the requirements that you have here, I imagine you're going to end up doing a lot of data aggregation. So Magic might be a really good candidate. The second best choice would be Adrenaline Data Flows. Adrenaline Data Flows is another premium beta feature. But if I had the choice, I would use Adrenaline Data Flows, assuming the data isn't too large, because a lot of these windowed functions that I'm going to write will run very quickly in Adrenaline. What I would absolutely not do is I would not use MySQL, and I would try like hell to avoid Redshift, because Redshift, by definition, you tack on 20 extra minutes to your execution time, making it a really poor candidate if latency is a concern. Yeah, so in a nutshell, magic, first choice. Second choice, what I'm about to show you here. Let's get to it. I've got my data set. And what we want to do is we want to calculate accumulation, right? So if I sort by person and sort by date, imagine you're talking to a duck, a rubber duck, and your rubber duck is not a genius, and you're trying to explain to the duck what you need to do. Okay, so what do I want to do? I want to accumulate for one user the sum of amounts. So 1 plus 16 is 17, 17 plus 45 is 162. Don't judge me. It's a big number, 62. And 62 is greater than 50, which is going to be my cutoff for the row I'm interested in. So I want to find the cumulative sum, and when the row exceeds 50, I want to extract the first row that exceeds 50, and then I want to take that date and subtract it from the first date that I had activity. Now, as soon as you notice yourself pointing across multiple rows and stuff like that, immediately in your mind you're thinking windowed functions. And so, like I said earlier, you're going to have to Google how that's done, or you watch the tutorial video. Window functions are phenomenal and actually surprisingly performant in Analyzer, but they have some caveats. And like I said earlier, the better you understand SQL, the better you'll be at kind of figuring out why DOMO does or does not behave the way you expect. So, this is normal cumulative sum. And by normal, I mean Bob standard, take it to any SQL implementation, use the right like double quotes or single quotes or whatever. But this is how standard SQL implements window function. I click validate formula, it validates. I put it in my card, I get a response. But as soon as I apply aggregation to the sum of amount, it breaks. And those of you who've worked with window functions before or have seen my tutorial, you know you can work around that problem by doing sum of amount, It works. In order to understand everything that's about to hit us, you need to understand why that broke. So let's understand standard SQL. Is there an undo button? I have an undo button. Let's go back to before I applied aggregation. Before I applied aggregation, the SQL query, the true SQL query was select person, date, amount from order by. Okay, that was the query before our cumulative sum. Then when I implemented cumulative sum, that's my cumulative sum. And this is what we have in Analyzer right now, and it works fine. But it broke as soon as we applied aggregation. Why did it break? It broke because when you apply aggregation, the rule is any column that's not wrapped in an aggregate function must be in the group by clause. You've seen this if you've written queries in SQL. You did exactly what I did here, and it threw an error. And so it said, oh, I have to move all of the columns that are not wrapped in an aggregate function into the group by clause. Let's ignore this guy. This is proper SQL. This will run because person and date are the other two columns in my select statement, and they are now in my group by clause. When I have a cumulative sum, you're like, but Jay, I have an aggregation. I have the sum of amount. No, not really. Sum of amount is not an aggregation because because, ignore the group by. The result of this is one value on every single row. The data is not collapsed and grouped by, dang it. It's not grouped by person and date yet. So in order to apply aggregation, we know, oh, I do a sum of amounts. That's what we do. Another way of seeing this, no, I'll cover that later. By wrapping this as sum, then I am applying aggregation to it, and it works as expected. Cool. How this really should be written is select person, date, let's call this temp1 as amount, and sum of temp2 over partition by person order by date as cumulative sum. What if I can't ask the database developers at DOMO, but if I had to guess, what I believe is truly happening what I believe is truly happening under the covers is DOMO is taking your data and it's converting it into a query and sending it to Adrenaline. We know, we understand that. But what it's doing is when you wrap the sum of amount in this aggregate function, what it really does is it turns it into a subquery. So it says, take date and person, calculate the sum of amount. And I'm actually going to end up calculating the sum of amount twice because I referenced it twice in my outer query. So here's temp1 as amount, here's temp2, and there's where I implement my window function after I calculate the sum of amount. And because this partition happens after the sum of amount and is referring to temp2, that's why I could theoretically replace temp2 as sum of amount, right? My reference to this inner subquery. And that is why we do sum over. Okay, this is good. I hope you understood that. If you didn't get it, well, watch it again. Maybe it'll make sense. Play with it a little bit. Eventually it'll make sense. This is just hard stuff. Like you just have to put in the time. But at the end of the day, I can see my cumulative sum doing what I want it to do. We're almost there-ish, not really at all. Now, what I also need to do is I need to know the first transaction date, right? Because the end goal is to say, at the point where the cumulative sum crosses my threshold, I want to take this date and I want to subtract the first date for that person. And in order to get the first date for that person, let's call it first transaction. In order to get the first transaction date for that person, what I want to do is I need to calculate the minimum date. But it's also an aggregation. Sorry, it's not an aggregation, it's also a window function. Partition by person, order by. And so I expect that to be the same value on every single row. Sorry, I don't need to order by date. That's extra. I can just do minimum date over partition by person. Just give me the first date that they've ever had an activity. And it gives me the same response. Good. Okay. Now, we're kind of in a good place, but this is where we get stuck. Because what I want to do is I want to exclude, I want to filter out all of the rows that I don't care about. And the only row I care about is the first row where the cumulative sum is greater than my threshold value. I only care about the first row where the cumulative sum is greater than the threshold value. And that's difficult / impossible to do because I cannot filter on a window function. Now there's some beta features that give you the ability to filter on window functions. Talk to your CSM about it. I personally do not recommend it to any of my customers because it behaves erratically. So I try to avoid it when possible. But I need to implement some sort of a rank down the road. But this also falls apart in other places. What happens when I drop date? Because I don't want to see every single date that I have activity. I only want to see dates for that one person. Why is happening? Sorry. Oh, because this is not accurate. Okay. So first transaction date is technically returning the response. Cumulative sum is technically returning the correct response. But at this point, I can no longer pick out the right row. Yeah. And if I take out person, because I could have 50,000 people, I want to know the average across all of my persons. This is when it gets really wrong. If I take out person, I get the first transaction date of the person with the lowest value, but I don't have the ability to get the first transaction date per person. This might sound complicated. Let me go back and illustrate this slightly different. What if I wrote case when date? No. Case when my cumulative sum is greater than 50. Then give me the date. And I need to remember to do greater than or equal to, as we want to know when they cross the threshold. Okay, here. So, we're going to have to figure out this ranking thing eventually, but these are dates of interest, right? But what happens if I remove date from the act? Now I get 1231, which is not when they're greater than 50. And I get 200101, also not greater than 50. What's going on? Again, in order to understand in order to understand your beast modes, you have to understand SQL. But I'll give you the rule. The rule is when you're building window functions, anything you use in your window must be on one of the axes in your chart. Because if you don't include it, DOMO won't have access. What do I mean by that? When you take date off of the axis, then DOMO says, oh, I guess you don't need date here. And I guess you don't need date here. And you don't need date here. So it takes date out of your data. And so now, if you think about the data that's returned from just this query, what do I get? I get one row per person and the sum of amounts. I don't get date. Now, if you ask for date, DOMO will pass a date. More specifically, in our case, it's actually passing the minimum date. It's passing the minimum date into our outer query. And that's why it's returning 1231, which is the min date. It's not It's not choosing the last date. It's not choosing the second to last date or the first date when we exceeded 50. We no longer have access to that data because our query literally does not have that resolution. This subquery has one row per person, the first date, and the sum of amount. It doesn't, that's it. So you can't do here what we're doing, the min temp date over partition by. It doesn't matter if you partition by person and order by date because there's only one date in our data set. And similarly, if we take out person, because I want to calculate the average across all people, if I take out person from my data set, it's no longer included in my anywhere in my data. And so all I would have here is functionally one row of data that has the minimum date, total amount. Not helpful. And for that reason, user 38617, for the reason I just described, you cannot implement your solution as just these. Just can't. So at this point, now that you know that, you make the decision. Do I go to Magic ETL, or do I sit around and listen to the solution that Jay came up with using dataset views, which is a beta feature in DOMO that nobody else knows about? Obviously, you stick around for cool stuff. But I'm going to save my work so far, but if I need to reference this later. So what on earth is a dataset? Dataset view is straight up the coolest thing coming out of DOMO right now because it leverages more of the awesome power that is Adrenaline. I'm not saying this as a DOMO junkie. I'm saying this as somebody who hates how long it takes Redshift data flows to run and who's frustrated by how long it takes Magic ETL to run. Magic, Redshift, MySQL, they are great tools. I recommend them all day, every day. But they are not fast, certainly not for a streaming data requirement, whereas Adrenaline can process millions of rows of data in one query without doing any performance tuning super fast, like stupid fast. And so I strongly recommend Adrenaline when you can. And that's what dataset views unlock. It's functionally similar to Fusions, but on steroids. Not that you should use steroids. All right. Anyway, Jay, what are you doing? Here's my view. I'm just going to call this view with windows, because I'm going to create those same window functions that I did in beast mode here in the dataset view. And what I'm super stoked about is if I do that, DOMO can pre-cache that data using whatever backend magic that they have going on without me having to access a card, and makes this beast mode available, or this dataset view available to all of the other cards where I might use it. Or I'll do even cooler things in just a second. Now, this really upsets me, and I wish DOMO would fix this. I'm not in Analyzer. I am functionally writing a query that will go directly to DOMO's database engine, which is cool, again. But unfortunately, if you write standard SQL, save this view, and then open up this view in an Analyzer, it won't work. You would think that DOMO could fix this, but you know, they're building out cool stuff, but this part kind of sucks. You cannot save this window function to the data set and then use this data view in Analyzer. So you must use the hack, the sum. You have to do this. But in order to do sum, I have to pre-aggregate my data, right? So in order to pre-aggregate my data, I have to add the group by functionality. So I'll say group by person, group by date, group by sum of amount, even though I don't want to, which is unfortunate. But now I can add my calculated column to sum. Now, what's unfortunate is I want to rename this column. I want it to be called amount, but you can't save it as amount because there's already another column called amount, just not at the aggregated level. Another layer of frustration. So I'll call this amount actual, and I'm actually going to call this amount cumulative. Cool. I'll also implement my first transaction. Exit the screen. Oh, did it save it? Damn it. Fine. We write it again. I had a spelling mistake that broke the UI. Real quick, sorry. Okay, this is good stuff. I'm going to do a quick save before I mess it up. And we called it DOMO accumulate with window. All right, this is good stuff. I could take this data set view, which again is similar to a fusion insofar as it's not a materialized data set. It's not stored in Vault. This is a query that only exists in the database layer in Adrenaline, which is why it will update very quickly. It doesn't matter if I have 5 rows or 5 million rows. This query will execute just as fast as, if not faster, than the queries that you run and analyze. So user 38617. Can I just pause on that for a minute? Sorry, guys. Please update your profile names to something a little bit more memorable. Not just because it makes it so that I have to flip pages every time I want to refer to you when I'm making tutorial videos, but like imagine if you have a distinctive user handle, as you start writing questions into the dojo, I can remember things that I've answered questions to you about, or what you know. I can remember what you know, what you don't know, what areas you struggle with. User 38617, I'm literally going to forget. And also, imagine if we ever met at Domo Palooza, you can be like, hey, I'm Superman, or I'm Data Maven, or I'm, who else is out there? The Wizard of Oz, right? I can remember those names, and then when we meet at Domo Palooza, put a name to the face, and then we have that whole history of all of our interactions in the dojo. All that to say, please update your profiles. It doesn't take any time. All right. What was I saying? This dataset view will update the second my underlying dataset changes, which is super great. No latency in terms of data processing. And if this is all I needed, that would be amazing. But we have to do more work. The problem we have is at the moment, I can't rank my data. I still can't pick out the row that I'm interested in. And which row are we interested in? Just remind ourselves. It's the first row for user B that crosses the 50 threshold. So that would be this row. This is the row that I want to keep. And I have to implement some sort of a rank function. And again, because because the dataset views are set up the way they are, I have to implement a rank over an aggregation, and it's not working. It doesn't work. You can try it. Try it on your own time. But for me, I couldn't get it to work, and I don't want to implement the rank in Analyzer because I can't filter on a window function in standard Analyzer. So I have yet another fantastic workaround. We're going to materialize this data set. We are going to create a copy of this data set as a CSV file, functionally, that will live in Vault. The upside to that being that because it lives in Vault, It's a normal data set. It doesn't know any about the history of it. Oh, you're a window function, blah, blah, blah. It just sees it as normal data. To do that, I will use dataset copy. Also, guys, if you are using dataset views and you have the bandwidth, like the time, I can't recommend this strongly enough. Take your dataset views, materialize them using the dataset copy connector, because it will create a real dataset in Vault. That dataset will be backed up, as in it will have history, and it will be a little bit more performant to work with because in Adrenaline, it's based off of a real dataset instead of a view, which is a query based off. All right, do I want to use the original dataset schema? Yes. If my underlying dataset changes, I want those changes reflected in this dataset copy. Do I only want the updated data? I'll say yes. So only move data that's actually changed over time. We'll call it CSV DOMO accumulate with window. This is also a way that you can transfer data from one instance of DOMO to another. You just have to have an access token, which you would set up under admin security access. Cool. So with this one step, I've now materialized this data set. It looks the exact same as my data set view, but now it's a data set that's coming out of Vault, which means that it will have history, it will get backed up over time. If I need to recover it, I can. The downside is if I have a million or multi-million row data set view, I have to copy that data set into Vault, and Vault takes as long as it takes to store multi-million row data sets. It's not as bad as necessarily running an ETL, but it will be similar in terms of it still has to write the data and index the data before you see it in a journal. All right, guys, we're on the home stretch. I have my normal data set. And again, at this point, literally there's no difference between using a dataset view with a data copy or Magic ETL and Redshift, except for how long did it take to process the data and create the data. I believe dataset views should be faster because I don't have to run it through the Magic ETL pipeline or worse yet, the Redshift pipeline. All I have to do is write the dataset to disk. And in Magic and Redshift, that's always the last step anyway, isn't it? Writing the data to disk. So it's just different ways of getting these columns. All right. So sorry, we're not. I lied. One more step. Before I can pull my data set into a card, right, we have our data set copy. I need one more view. I need one more layer in between. And here, I'm going to implement my rank. That's the last. So in order to implement rank, we need date, person, and then we need our aggregation, right? Because we're going to put a window function. In order to have a window function, you have to have aggregation, which is unfortunate, but there you go. Sum amount cumulative over partition by person and order by date. Now, what do I actually want to do? Case when the sum of amount cumulative is greater than or equal to 50. Then return a 1, else return a 0. So for each row greater than 50, it's going to return a 1. And then because I'm implementing a cumulative sum, it will actually be a rank. If I know how to spell. It's when. Yeah, so row 62 is the first row over 50, row 60 is the first row over 50, 65 is the second, 68 is the third. Now I can, in Analyzer, filter on rank equals 1. And again, implementing rank in Analyzer as a filter just isn't great. And for those of you who are like, I want to have top 10 salespeople or top 10 whatever, this is a pretty solid way of implementing top 10. No, it's not seamless. Yes, it's an extra step, which kind of sucks. But you could have your data set, implement many rankings, and then in your analyzer, have the different rankings that you apply as filters. You'll get the job done. And again, what I appreciate about this is that I'm not using a data flow to create these rankings. So it should update virtually instantaneously. So I'm going to filter and only keep my first row. Take out aggregation. It's called some amount actual and some amount cumulative, but these are terrible label. Okay. So I've accumulated 62 and 60 points on person A, and instead of showing the data by week, I want to show one. Please. Okay. And first. Why aren't you there? Oh, sorry guys, I didn't include my date for the first transaction in my view that I just defined. Okay, now I have the date of my. So this is the date of my first transaction. This is the date that I crossed the 50 threshold. So now all I have to do is a date diff. And let's see if that checks. I'm not interested in the activity that day. I'm interested in the cumulative amount. So I started, user A started on 19/12/31. They accumulated 62 points on 1/10, and that was the first day that they crossed the threshold. If I did rank is greater than or equal to 1, then I could see user B had more activity, they accumulated more points, but I'm not interested in that. Cool. Now, a while ago now, it feels like, we went down this path of creating dataset views, dataset copy, and then one more dataset view on top of it. The whole reason for it was because, remember, the original desire was to do it all in Analyzer. But the problem we ran into was that as soon as I drop person or date from the axes in my card, if all of this is built off of beast mode, it removes the requirement to include person and date in the group by clause in the subquery. So I no longer have access to that data. It just compressed by removing the group by clause. It compressed the data into just one row for the entire data set. But functionally, by creating, this is our first data set view, right? In our first data set view, we included date. We included the first transaction date, and we included the cumulative sum and the sum of amount. Instead of saving all of this as a data set view, we created a, we create view as data set view with window. We actually created a data set. And I said, you know what, that's good, but I also want to implement ranking over the top of it. So we then took this data set view and we did something along the lines of select into table dataset CSV dataset view from, that's really bad pseudocode. Right, we created a table based off of that dataset view. That's our CSV dataset view. And I said, you know what, this is good, but we need to create another view on top of it where we implement ranking. So then we did create view, dataset view with rank, where we implemented the rank function. I just did it, I'm not going to go over it again. And that's the table, that's the card that we're now building. There's a couple layers in between, but now I can remove person from the axis. I can remove everything except what I really care about, which is the average number of days. User 38617. This is your solution. Like I said at the start, if it were me, I would say do it in Magic ETL unless your data is too large, and try it in Magic ETL 2.0 before you assess too large, because really Magic 2.0 is much faster. As long as we're talking like, I don't know, sub 50, what did I originally say? 5 and 10 million rows, even 50 million rows, I think will be well within what Magic can do. Do not, under any circumstances, try this in Redshift or MySQL. It will be very frustrating and definitely slower, assuming you don't have big joins. And even then, if you have big joins, email me because I have a better solution than Redshift. We looked at using window functions. Like I said at the beginning, if you don't know how to do a window function, you can literally Google window function. The only thing that kind of makes it different in the analyzer is the fact that we have to do that sum over. And if you understand the fact that analyzer is creating subqueries, then the sum element kind of starts to make sense. My name's Jay Wilson. Guys, this was difficult to record, but this is what I do. I think about Domo. I take the time to understand that how it works so that I can come back to you guys with a recommendation like use Magic, don't use Magic. And it's backed by more than just opinion or what I'm comfortable with, and actually baked into like a thoughtful analysis of what's happening under the cover, so that you can more quickly get to the point where you have a solution. I hope this works out for you, user 38617, and I'll catch you guys later.